What's up, fight fans? It's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast episode 110. If you're wondering why we're one ahead, it's because we did an extra one last week, so go listen to that if you missed out on it. Coming at you on Tuesday morning after the UFC 231 card, so we've got a little bit to talk about today in the recaps. I'm going to do a good few questions, and not too much news this week, especially because we did 2 podcasts last week, so we got most of the news out of the way. But what we have got in the news is fun enough. Oliver Enkamp is going to Bellator, which is kind of an unforeseen one. I thought he was still with the UFC, but apparently not. Enkamp's the brother of Jesse Enkamp, so the brother of a very famous karate blogger, the Karate Nerd, but brilliant in his own right. Very solid fighter. Lots of like little tactical errors that you would want to see ironed out over time, like where he stands in the cage. He does a lot of standing on the fence and things like that. Probably best remembered for, was it Danny Roberts? Went straight down the centre on the sidekick, smothered the sidekick and hit him while he was on one leg, got the knockout. But yeah, not a bad fighter. Like, one of these kids who's grown up doing something very, very well in karate and has all the moves but doesn't really have the, I suppose, brain, but comfort behind it to pick the right ones to do in the right situations. He's like standing on the fence and trying to wheel kick people, and it's just not working. But yeah, I think in Bellator he'll probably pick up some awesome knockouts, even if he doesn't get much better tactically. Donald Cerrone versus Alexander Hernandez announced for January 19th. Is that the ESPN card? No, I don't think that's might be the ESPN card. But yeah, that's decent. I mean, Donald Cerrone is a guy. Well, he'll be returning to lightweight for this fight, having had sort of a hit-and-miss run up at welterweight. But meeting a lightning-fast lad in Alexander Hernandez, someone who likes to stance switch and do things like that. A very explosive guy. But yeah, another one of these fights where it's Donald Cerrone against a guy who comes out of the gate fast. And if they do that, they could give him problems. But sometimes they get daunted by the legend of MMA that is Donald Cerrone standing opposite them. Like Mike Perry came out and just did nothing like what he would normally do. What else is going on? Oh, not really a piece of news, but I thought pretty funny. Apparently Sage Northcutt was offered the Santiago Ponzinibbio fight and another fight in a 2-fight contract with the UFC, but turned it down to go to one. Just who, having seen all their fights in the UFC, who would think that's a good idea? That's I think this was for UFC Argentina, so it wasn't it was before Ponzinibbio just murdered Neil Magny. But equally, that fight reads like, we need Ponzinibbio to knock someone out in Argentina. Let's give him Sage Northcutt. But then what's the point in keeping Sage Northcutt around? They were so high on him, and he's just picked up a fairly decent win, and then they're just going to throw him to Ponzinibbio to be murdered. Well, actually, the win was probably after Ponzinibbio. I can't remember. At any rate, Ponzinibbio would have killed Sage Northcutt. Other announcements, Cro Cop versus Roy Nelson 2 set for Bellator 217. Some people still care about this. I'm really surprised. I feel like they have booked this fight before it didn't happen, because Cro Cop won't fight on American soil. He has one win in his entire life on American soil, in MMA at least, and that was over Eddie Sanchez. And, Roy Nelson's a close second, but he's still not Eddie Sanchez. Yeah, God, I just don't give a shit. That won't happen. Cro Cop, we all know Cro Cop's on the roids hardcore now. Everyone refers to him as like non-USADA Cro Cop. While Bellator don't test properly, they still, there's still a level of testing in any real commission run area that you go. I mean, unless they take him to an Indian reservation, I'll have to check where that's actually happening. Bellator also announced that James Gallagher is going to be main eventing their February Dublin card against someone I've never heard of called Graham. Yeah, standard. James Gallagher. He's still a talent, but he is just kind of like the rest of the guys from that gym who aren't Conor, just not very good strikers with decent grappling. And the annoying thing is that he's trying to be more and more like Conor. And like even imitating his laugh, just dreadful. And that Bandejeras, or whatever his name was, Ricky, knocked him out the other month. That was hilarious. The amount of like, when keeping it real goes wrong, or when you act tough and get knocked out videos that went up after that was just fucking hilarious. And then I posted a video of him like wearing these, they're all wearing these pedo glasses. I don't know why, like 1970s big frame, wireframe, big lens, make your eyes gigantic glasses. Don't know why Conor and he both wear those. I don't think they're coming back into fashion. I'm pretty up on the fashion community, as you know, if you've listened to the last week's podcast. But yeah, I laughed at that, and immediately, like, loads of people... I wasn't laughing at the knockout, I was laughing at this stupid outfit, and loads of people were like, oh yeah, very good. Grown journalist picking on teenage boy. And this dude actually called him a teenage boy. I was like, he's 22! Grow the fuck up. He needs to. If this were the Middle Ages, he'd be middle-aged. Like, that's where we are. You can't keep hiding behind, oh, he's just a kid. Like John Jones, he's still a young man. He makes mistakes, even though his hairline has now disappeared. Oh God, Craig Jones has just shot back recently, along with gaining a lot of muscle. But we'll talk about that match. Actually, I don't know. We'll talk about that match later. If you haven't seen it, Polaris was on. It was pretty decent. It's always pretty decent, but it's no Quintet 3. And then finally, I suppose we better touch on the bloody elbow scandal. It wasn't really... Well, is it a scandal? I mean, the scandal was... Ian Kidd, who used to do a lot of stuff on performance-enhancing drugs and do a lot of research on that sort of stuff, and actually put out good articles about it. I, relied on him for the Lyoto Machida stuff. He was one of the foremost guys just moaning about Machida getting too long, and I was there going, yes, he's right. Why is Machida being banned for 2 years for a diet supplement? Which he immediately reported himself for. But yeah, it turned out Ian Kidd had some paedophilia convictions against him. And yeah, it was all very messy because obviously when that happens, everyone goes to Twitter and gets on Bloody Elbow to make a statement. And I kind of sympathise with Bloody Elbow, to be honest, because, this is where everyone goes, well, Jack worked there 5 years ago. He's obviously still in the pocket of big money Bloody Elbow. But SB Nation has an actual legal department, and if you've ever been in the situation where someone's been dismissed at work for something like that or something similar, well, not even something similar, something scandalous, no one is allowed to say a fucking word until legal had gone through it with a fine-tooth comb. Especially when it was this, and it was happening, I think it was 2017, so that had just snuck up on them. They hadn't learned about the news until someone went and found it. And so, you've got this massive hole where you're like, shit, we've been blindsided by this news. So yeah, let legal sort it out first. And then all the Bloody Elbow guys put out a statement the next day just saying, obviously disgusted by actions, didn't know it was happening or had happened. Pretty upsetting, to be honest. People like Crooklyn, who's great fun on Twitter and in interviews and things like that. But she'd been working with him for ages and, no idea that was the case. So yeah, it's a punch in the gut if you've worked with someone and especially if you liked them and you find out that they were that. The most hilarious part of this whole situation, though, I'm not going to weigh in too much on paedophilia being wrong because they shouldn't fucking have to. Like, people are going, oh, why won't Bloody Elbow condemn this? And you're like, you really think they're going to stand by it? No, they're making sure they got all their fucking P's and Q's in order so they don't get sued by someone at some point. The funny part was that Ian Kidd did used to argue with people a lot on Twitter, and, whom amongst us doesn't. But now, especially being a guy who, talked a lot about John Jones's drug use and things like that, he ended up blocking a lot of people. And all of these announcement threads on, Reddit and the articles going up, every comment section was full of, this guy blocked me on Twitter. I knew there was something wrong with him. Team to the Junk's response was just legendary. He just couldn't... People can't cope with the idea that they might just be obnoxious online. No, it's definitely because there was something wrong with that guy. Can't be both. Anyway, let's talk about UFC 231 because it was pretty good. Do you know what? I'm just going to lead with the main event because the rest of the card can just bite my ass. The main event was where it was all happening. Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega. And we said this in the pre-fight. It's the man who has lost almost every round in the UFC, but always finds a way to finish, versus the man who just keeps pouring it on. I wrote something very poetic about him being like a torrent, a trickle that turns into a torrent over a fight. Yeah, it was pretty good. Go read the pre-fight piece at Unibet, or the post-fight piece at Vice. But yeah, Max Holloway looked sublime in this fight. Absolutely splendid. All behind ones and twos, which I pretty much said in the pre-fight. I said I expect he'll do most of his work with the jab and the right straight, or the left straight, depending if he switches stances or not, which he does all the time. and then dig to the body as well. And he found that balance perfectly. I mean, that's what I find so impressive about Max Holloway is, we found out how good, how useful body shots can be when guys like, Takanori Gomi's run through the Pride lightweight division. He was learning to box. They found out he could hit very hard, and he was like, what if I just hit people in the body? And he got hit in the face all the time while he was doing it, but he just wilted these guys under fire. And, Fedor versus Krokop did a lot of body shots, but the rest of the time he was like swinging at people's heads. The thing about Max is that no matter who he's fighting, he goes to the body. It's not just for that one specific Krokop opponent he's training for. It's always part of his game plan, and he boxes his way into those body shots. He's not just ducking in to get them. He's jabbing and then getting in behind as the opponent tries to counter, or shifting in, or backing up and drawing them onto back kicks. Didn't kick an awful lot in this fight, but just absolutely brilliant at getting to the body. Someone put up a streamable compilation of all his body shots on Reddit, and in this fight that is, and it's just brilliant. The double jab was a huge factor because he could just. The whole thing about Ortega is that he has these defensive overreactions. He tries to shoulder roll, it doesn't really work. He tries to slip, and he slips really deep. So basically, Max was just double jabbing, drawing the reaction out of Ortega, and then placing the right hand on him wherever he'd gone. If Ortega was taking a step back, he'd jab again and then catch him with the right hand on the end. If Ortega didn't step back, he'd land the right hand and step out to the side and then try the 1-2 again. The 1-2-1-2 is just Manny Pacquiao made a career out of it, but Max Holloway is doing it the same. He did it to Aldo. Aldo, very used to working in these I punch, now you punch. Or you punch, I'll counter, and then we're just not going to do anything for about 30 seconds. Whereas when he fought Max Holloway, Max was in his face, just annoying him with the jab the whole time. It wasn't a power punch. It was just like, what are you doing? Hey, do something, And, Aldo's entire counterpunching game is I stand with my head still, and then I do a big slip, come back as hard as I can with a counterpunch and a low kick maybe. Not against Ortega, not against Holloway. He didn't low kick much at all. But Aldo is a loading up kind of guy. Max Holloway is just the punches are the same for every round. Very similar to what Gene Tunney used to say in his book A Man Must Fight, which I reference a lot, but you really don't need to read. It's not that great. It was way more expensive than it needed to be because it's out of print and it's an ancient book, and it's just sort of like his memoir. But he believed that he used to be a banger and then he hurt his hands a lot. But he believed that the scientific boxer, most of his punches are straight, and most of them are mainly arm punches. If you want to hit harder, you start turning your hips in more, using your legs more. But for most punches, your arm's enough, he believed. There is no right answer. But Max Holloway does a lot of that, where it's just sort of not nearly a whole body punch. And of course, Tunney's opponent, legendary opponent Jack Dempsey, would completely disagree with that. He thought every punch had to be pure, and partial punches were a waste of time for the most part. But yeah, just jab, jab, right hand, jab, right hand, jab, right hand. Love the 1-2-1-2. Absolutely brilliant combination. Got to the body lots. He hooked to the body off the jab. I just jizzed myself thinking about it. I put that up. I tried to film reel it. I was trying some new stuff in the article this week, the recap, and I was trying to lay it out like a film strip so that you could see each important frame, that is, and I could talk about what was happening, because it was in a sequence where he jabbed in on Ortega. Ortega pivoted offline, thinking, hey, I'm pretty clever here, into a really exaggerated shoulder roll. And Max just followed him and went to the kidney behind the elbow. We were talking about this in the pre-fight. The shoulder roll, one of the big openings, if you're not fighting under strict boxing rules where the kidney punch is illegal, and the kidney punch has only been illegal for a little while. I think it was a European thing originally, because Sugar Ray Robinson went over to Germany to fight, I think it was Hecht, and he kidney punched the shit out of him, and then they retroactively DQ'd him. I can't remember it was like, oh, this guy's just giving me the kidney punch because obviously it'd been illegal there for however long. I'm just going to go for it. And he just hammered it 5 times. Jim Driscoll complained about the kidney punch in the 1930s really taking off. He said that there was a really good boxer, I can't remember his name, but he was a good boxer in his own right, but people noticed he was kidney punching a lot from the clinch, So he said for about the next 2 years, every amateur bout he attended was just lads falling into clinches and punching each other in the kidney over the back. And he was just like tearing his hair out, saying, no, there's more to it than that. You're looking at the part of the game that really doesn't make a difference for him. But kidney punches out in the open, like if the guy gives you the opening, a full kidney punch, it fucking hurts. Well, we said last week, punched in the soul of the dick, or the dick of the soul. And Holloway was looking for him. Like in Ortega, he was using both stances, but when he hooked to the body off the jab, it was behind the elbow. Normally that's to the floating rib from like a closed guard situation or the solar plexus, but he landed it behind the elbow to the kidney. And then later on, when Ortega was more standing at orthodox stance, he'd go with the wide right to the kidney, and he did that. I think he doubled up on it at one point. It's just there were so many little things that Holloway was doing in this fight that were just great. And I could have made like 100 GIFs of them and been like, look at this, but I like to just talk about the fight and have a couple of GIFs to demonstrate important points. One of the important points was that Holloway, while he pushes an incredible pace, 500 punches in this fight over 4 rounds, landed something like 300. Over the course, I think someone said he threw more in the 4th round than Ortega did in the entire fight or something like that. Incredible. But he'll push the pace, go forward, and then he never gets carried away. You know, he'll happily take a step back and look to counter. And that's the important part. You can't... The Nick Diaz's of the world do just go forward and they get hit an awful lot. Holloway gets hit occasionally, but, you know, you're not going to be unhittable going forward. But he does a really good job generally of keeping himself pretty safe. The 3rd round was bizarre. Ortega landed a couple of good shots, got some stuff going, but still was outlanded like 2-1. And people were like, "Oh my god, Ortega's back in this." The commentary on this fight was pretty bad. I mean, I love that booth, but they were just, I don't know, maybe they were just feeling it that night. But it was all about how Ortega is a really serious test and a great striker. And oh my god, he just needs one to knock. Well, maybe he did just need one to knock Max Holloway out, but the evidence was that he was landing these punches and they weren't knocking Max Holloway out, and then he was still getting outlanded even in the one round where he did best. Props to Ortega on his takedown attempts. The stat that I drew up before this fight was Holloway has completed 4. He's worked at an 80% takedown completion rate by attempting 5 takedowns in 18 UFC fights, and I think 3 of them were in one fight. So, you know, really not a part of his game. Where Brian Ortega has completed 1 takedown in his UFC tenure, having attempted something like 5. He's at like a 20% completion rate. And, you know, he in this fight particularly, but in most fights, you would imagine he should try and get the fight to the floor. His game has always been like, I'm going to hit you and you're going to try and take me down. So it was interesting to see him actually get Max down in the first round, timed a shot fairly well. But Holloway stiff-armed the head, based out on the hand, and then just technical stand-up while keeping the head away and freeing the bottom leg. And then the rest of the takedown attempts, and that one, once he got up, he just fed in the single. You know, fed in the single, hopped to the fence, worked his way out of it, or limp-legged out of it in the centre of the cage. I think BJJ Scout used Max Holloway as the example when he was talking about defending takedown or defending Khabib's cage wrestling. You know, you get them on the single and then you limp leg out towards the centre of the cage, you run away. And yeah, I think probably used a clip of Holloway to demonstrate that, but Holloway did the exact same limp leg out of the single from Ortega the other night. Oh, Max would have done him, is what I'm saying. Max would have done him. I'm well interested in that fight, if it ever actually happens, because Max is a big old featherweight. Ortega did try a couple of snap downs along the fence, which were actually pretty nice. You know, we ask why guys don't attempt snap downs off the fence more often, and generally it's because the wrestlers will prefer to try and complete a proper takedown than go to the front headlock. And the jiu-jitsu guys, not many of them have realised the value of the snap down, and not many of them can wrestle at the level where they are good enough to snap guys down, consistently against good wrestlers. But as soon as Ortega off-balanced Holloway and started to try and reach over the head, Holloway was like arched back, look up at the ceiling, standing up, didn't care about anything else. It was just like, I'm not getting snapped down. Heather Gracie was not particularly helpful in the corner throughout the rounds. He's going perfect. Now I just want you to keep trying to get the neck or the takedown or whatever. Even though Ortega fought, except for the 4th round where he was getting eaten alive, he really wasn't looking for takedowns as much as he should, or as much as the situation would warrant. But Penna did do a good job when, between the fourth and fifth round, he was trying to tell Brian that he didn't want him to continue, and he was like, Doc, get over here, tell him that he can't continue. And he said, I'm not going to let you fucking die in the cage. And you're like, fair play, because they have always had they've always seemed to have a very real relationship. My takeaway from this fight was that, actually, shout out to Brian Ortega's elbows, because while he isn't as technically crisp, and he's still finding his feet as a striker, whereas Max is already established as like one of the best to ever do it in MMA. Ortega did land some really interesting elbows, and he sets traps, which is what you're looking for from, like, in potential from a striker. They've got to be able to see that they can make stuff happen. They've got to be able to pick the spots and work out when would be best to do things. Max Holloway wouldn't be Max Holloway if he was just 1-2ing all the time or just body shotting all the time. It's his ability to mix between things and choose when to do things as opportunities open up throughout the fight. And that's probably not like an inner monologue for Max, is that he's so practiced and he's seen all these openings and he has a feel for when it happens. But Ortega did really well on a couple of elbow attempts, is what I was. I had to pause myself because I was like, Ortega did really well. Well, actually didn't, but a couple of things he did were really good. In the first round, he shifted back to make, because Holloway was double jabbing in, and he caught him with a winging forearm that didn't quite connect with the elbow. And then later on, he he stepped back and went back into like a shoulder roll, and as Max came in, he tried to backward elbow him, the Anderson Silva Tony Strickland elbow. And that's something that I've actually been working on this month, not working on some writing about, because I'm rewriting the Anderson Silva section of the old advanced striking book, and I'm going to put it up for the Patreon boys. And one of the things that Anderson Silva has been doing more recently, where against Tony Strickland, he was, hand trap, drop the arm way low, and then bring it back, and because it was a complete surprise to everyone. Now, if you've seen him in his more recent fights, he'll try and do it off like a shoulder roll. He'll try and draw the opponent in, and then the hand is already low across the waist, so it's in position. You don't have the load up. You just have the bringing it up underneath. And Ortega almost caught Holloway with that. Holloway was pursuing him and then went, whoop, nope, not having that, and the elbow just sort of went up just in front of his nose. So that was a nice one. And then the really nice one was Ortega showing a little bit more savvy again. Don't just try and set the traps, lead and then draw him into a counter and then try and counter his counter. So he goes in with a 1-2 or a left hook, right straight or whatever, and then Holloway returns and Ortega goes into like his deep lean, which is really bad. That's what's been getting him caught. And Holloway's like, yep, placing that right on your head there, mate. Just lining up the right hand as he's ducking down low. And before he can even do it, Ortega spins into a back elbow and hits him smack in the head. Beautiful stuff. Which gives me hope for Brian Ortega's future. Because as I said at the end of my recap article, or my post-fight article, or whatever you want to call it, Brian Ortega is a guy who's got this far with massive holes in his game. He's the jiu-jitsu savant who doesn't do takedowns, and his striking is just basically out-toughing people, but he still finds these spots really well. So improve the striking, and you've got another string to your bow, and you can be more of a threat and make people take you down more. Improve the wrestling, and you can actually force the takedown and make people scared of the takedown, and then have more opportunities on the feet as a result. Basically, don't look at this as Brian Ortega losing in a blowout, because he did lose in a blowout, but don't look at it like that. Look at it like, if either aspect of Brian Ortega's game, standing or takedowns, improves, he becomes considerably more of a threat to everyone. And mad props for the Heart. Mad props. It's very fashionable to not like him because he is a steroid cheat, but it's unbelievable grit to just keep going out there, losing every round like 3 punches landed to 1, getting absolutely battered and still being like, yeah, I'm going to pull off the submission. He would have gone out and taken another 100 punches in round 5, and then if he'd made it through, gone, yep, I just ran out of time, because he's got that attitude, the old big nog attitude, and it's not good for your health, and it's good that there's a corner there looking out for him, but it is something you can't teach. What else happened? Valentina was coronated against Joanna Jędrzejczyk in not a bad fight, I thought. Again, it's like we talked about in the pre-fight. both of these people work better when the opponent's coming to them, but you get the sense that Shevchenko knows that more than Joanna and Jacek does. So there was an awful lot of like jabbing from way out and not really doing anything from Joanna in the early going. Joanna's clinch striking I thought looked good. It always looks good actually, and then she doesn't really use it as much as she could. But again, in the clinch, that was where you really saw the well, not size difference because they came in about the same weight, but obviously Valentina has been working against bantamweights her entire UFC career, whereas Joanna Jędrzejczyk's been the best wrestler or best counter wrestler at least, at strawweight. So, temper your excitement. Someone on Reddit tagged me and I was like, what's this? And I went to the above comment that they tagged me under. And it was just like, and she speaks 5 languages and she's got a black belt in judo. Oh, I just love her. It's just this gushing over Valentina. But as I said in my reply to that, I think it's allowable this time because she did just beat a legit world-class fighter. It's not the same as like the previous year that we've been gushing over her was for beating someone you've never heard of and won't hear of again. No one's seen Priscilla Cachoeira since. Like, that's how unimportant she is. And do temper your excitement for this fight too, because firstly, there's no division now. she said in the post-fight, I want to be an active champion, I want to fight 3 times a year. I was like, against who? Or are they just queuing out the door for you in that division? And secondly, like, this is the exact equivalent of a men's featherweight going down to bantamweight to beat a men's flyweight. So, there's that. But again, not taking too much away from Shevchenko, just sort of like tempering that with realism. There is no need for this division. It was just an awesome super fight, which had a belt attached for some reason. Well, for pay-per-view reason, and because Valentina, obviously. Gunnar Nelson versus Alex Oliveira. Alex Oliveira is such a cheeky fucking bastard. He's such a cheat. Came in 10 pounds heavy against Will Brooks, and then had the audacity to flip off Brooks when he broke his rib. But in this fight, he was grabbing the fence, downward elbow straight on the back of Gunnar Nelson's head, and some people on Twitter were still like, I think it was more like a side of the back of the head, and you're like, shut up. This is just bollocks that people play with this rule when a ref gets it wrong so that they can justify it afterwards. I had some actual ref on Facebook trying to tell me that if the downward elbow arcs slightly, as in, like, you throw your hand back behind your head and bring it down, as opposed to straighten your arm out above your head and bring it down, exact same elbow. But if you throw your hand behind your head and bring it down, that's arced, so it's technically not 12-6. I was like, that's just shit, really. You're just trying to find a way to not penalise people for breaking a rule. But back of the head is always illegal rather. So, yeah, fuck Alex Oliveira. And then his corner just splashed him all over with water the moment before he went out for round 2. So good that Gunnar Nelson kicked the shit out of him, elbowing him in the head, and apparently he tapped to the blood because he saw the amount of blood coming out of his head and he thought he was going to die, rather than the choke. That was a ghastly elbow and cut. And I'd seen Gunnar Nelson do the same thing to some lad. I watched him live in London. Maybe it was Manchester. But yeah, he did the same thing. Got a lad down, mounted him, landed one elbow, and it was like perfect, cut him open. Duarte versus Bokniak, meh. Oh, Santos versus Manuwa. Now this was a fight. And Jesus, I was on Reddit. I was like, that was a brilliant fight. Even though it's sorry, not Reddit, Twitter. It's an absolute mess, obviously. But people come back and be like, yeah, if you like shit like that, I'm not actually a fan of that. I prefer more technical fights. And I'm like, motherfucker. I wanted to do like a do you know who I am? It's just. Don't fucking lecture me on technical fights. You are allowed to like silly bollocks because this sport is full of it, and that was peak silly bollocks. Santos had the right idea, come out and try and chin Manuwa early because his chin isn't always solid and he can be caught early. But then when it didn't work out, he was just like, keep going. So Manuwa rocked him at one point and he like span again and then tried like a bicycle kick that you would attempt in football or soccer for the Americans, and missed. And my wife heard me laughing like boisterously, and she's like, "What are you watching?" And it's like, "Oh, just the UFC. It's not a new comedy. Just Thiago Santos, former welterweight. How the fuck did he do that? This dude is absolutely massive." Then he picks up the knockout and he puts his hands on his hips and looks at the camera like. Exactly as planned. What a legend. I can't remember the last bad fight he was in. He's just so much fun. Jimmy Manuwa, very hit and miss fighter. Like, when he's on, he's on. But if he's ruffled? If his feathers are ruffled and his jimmies are rustled, he is, he just isn't there. If he if he can get going like he did against OSP, when was that? God, that was 2 years ago. But if he can get going like that, then he's just incredible. But, we're at the point where he's 4-2 in his last 6. And between Özdemir, Johnson, Gustafsson, Santos, he's been knocked out 4 times. So I don't know. I want to say he needs to find something to keep him a bit safer in the early going, but he does. He tries to push to the fence in the clinch, like the Jimmo fight, like that fight with Ryan Jimmo, where it was just the most boring fight in the world. But he clearly, something from Jimmo rubbed off on him, and he had plenty of time in the clinch for it to do so. But he tries to push to the clinch and calm guys down. But Özdemir and Santos have both managed to spaz out of the clinch and hit him on the break. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what he does there. What else was on? To be honest, some people were really hot on this card, but some of the prelim stuff just didn't play out as well as I'd hoped. Gedalia obviously gasses as usual, but actually loses this time, which was incredible. Gilbert Burns versus Olivier Aubin-Mercier was actually pretty good. Good fun stuff. Gilbert Burns looking black explosive, and also just landing some good counters in that. And he seems to be getting wider in the face every time I see him. Jessica Eye versus Katlyn Chookagian. Going to admit, I didn't actually watch that because it's a Jessica Eye fight. I tweeted, is this Jessica Eye fight worth watching? Unanimously no. I got about 100 replies saying no. Lars Theodora versus Eric Anders, slow one as usual. And then, the prelims, a couple of KOs and TKOs on there, but no one particularly important that we're going to linger on too long. So a solid event, I thought. Right, let's do some questions and then we'll get out of here for this week. Hello, Jack. From your memory of combat sport history, is there a difference between higher and lower weight classes? Has there been a definitive research, brackets not flat earth style research, into the reason KOs happen? I remember years ago a fighter only having theories as to why. I see some jabs and straight snapping heads back, but lesser looking punches end up with the KO. I don't know. Cheers from Philip. Yeah, it's been a while since I read any proper studies on it, but I believe where we're at is that the knockout is the brain being traumatized and shutting the body down in an attempt to protect the brain further or something like that. That's what I've heard a lot, but I'm not sure. Maybe like a fainting goat, you fall to the floor and then, I don't know, maybe someone go, fuck it, not worth it. The tendencies seem to be, if you expect a punch or see a punch coming, you take it a lot better than if that same punch caught you by surprise, which I suppose lends to the idea that it's trying to save you from further trauma, or your brain from further trauma, rather than the power of the impact itself. A lot of it's to do with theories on the brain shaking around inside the head, inside the skull, which somewhat accounts for the why punches you don't see hurt you more theory, because your neck isn't clenched and you're not making those micro adaptations to the punch that you see coming. But yeah, it seems to be unexpected trauma is what causes a knockout for whatever reason. And unexpected trauma is obviously, most trauma is expected in a fight. But you'll notice guys' chins get a lot worse when they, 1, get tired, 2, start struggling to see things. John Lineker is a fantastic example of this. John Dodson closed his eyes up with punches. John Lineker didn't even flinch. John Lineker is blind in one eye at the end of the fight, gets hit with an uppercut or something like that wouldn't have done anything to him in the previous rounds. But between fatigue and not being able to see it, he's suddenly on wobbly legs for the first time from John Dodson, of all people, who is very much doing the double right hand and run away shtick. Oh, and Phil signs off with Max Goat. Hi Jack, as a long-time fan of both professional wrestling and combat sports in general, I greatly appreciated your article on Shinsuke Nakamura breaking down the mechanics of striking in pro wrestling from a few years ago. Yeah, go read that, it's a good one. I would like to talk about this and crossover stars in both. Even though it is not true competition in the sense that MMA or boxing is, it always impresses me seeing the evolution of pro wrestling and incorporation of legitimate strikes into matches. After all, were it not for very careful placement of these strikes, we would likely see a lot of accidental knockouts in wrestling matches. One such example, one example I find particularly entrancing is that of Kenny Omega and his V-trigger knee strike. Creating the illusion of landing a devastating knee while performing such a move safely is truly an art in itself. Of course, there are a plethora of legitimate martial artists who have crossed over the divide between MMA and pro wrestling and vice versa, with varying degrees of success. I often think back to the mid-2000s Inokiism, with Inoki shipping venerable Puro legend Yuji Nagata, himself an accomplished amateur wrestler, off to Pride to face the likes of Fedor Emelianenko and Mirko Krokop, which unfortunately equated to a very one-sided beating on both occasions for Nagata. On the flip side, at the incredible age of 50, MMA legend and catch wrestling veteran Minoru Suzuki still features prominently as an upper mid-carder in New Japan, while ironically, even though Suzuki's catch wrestling credentials are widely acknowledged, it is his striking that has put over as particularly devastating, despite this being a notable weakness in his MMA repertoire compared to his contemporaries in the mid-90s, even during his time in Pancrase. Then on top of that, we have monsters like Brock Lesnar, who has not had an MMA bout since Mark Hunt, in what is one of the most favourable stylistic matchups possible, and subsequently popping for estrogen blockers, ready to jump the queue for a title shot, even ahead of Stipe Miocic. Miocic is a strong case as possibly the best heavyweight champion the UFC has likely ever had. Sadly, he could likely end up on the receiving end of a terrible injustice here, as if Lesnar is to defeat Cormier, this would throw the entire UFC heavyweight division into a state of chaos. In the process, leaving Miocic sitting on the sidelines in the title picture, while still being the best all-around fighter in the division by a considerable margin. So now that I have waxed lyrical long enough, I would like to ask you who your favourite crossover stars in MMA and wrestling are. I would like to hear your thoughts on the art of striking in professional wrestling and examples which have caught your eye for technical striking. Cheers from Daniel. Yeah, a good long question with a rant about Stipe Miocic in the middle, which I like. Stipe is very, very good and in a shitty spot at the moment. I wrote an article ages ago called Shinsuke Nakamura and the Bomaye knee or something like that. Shinsuke Nakamura does this amazing knee, which was named the Bomaye knee after Inoki Bomaye, which is named after Muhammad Ali Bomaye or Bomaye Muhammad Ali, meaning kill him in whatever they speak in Zaire or the Congo. I wanted to say Afrikaans, but I don't think it is. Ali Bomaye. So he does this amazing knee, and it's all to do with placement. The guy will be kneeling on the floor in front of him, and he'll run up, perform what looks like a devastating knee, throw the knee over the shoulder, but allow the shin to hit the chest, and that provides the weight of the strike. So the trick is to make it look like it has weight. So he can actually dive through, throw his entire weight onto the other guy, send the other guy flying with his weight as well, but not actually hit him with the point of the knee and the head. He's hitting him with the shin across the chest, all the way across it, so you're spreading out the impact. And there's a lot of moves like that in professional wrestling, which are really cool. Kenny Omega and people like that are doing a lot of knees over the back of the head, which is where the shin comes down on the back of the neck. Very tricky to make that one look good. And I always think it is actually hitting them when I see it, so that's impressive that they can do that if they can do it without hurting people. Is it Aleister Black, the actual vampire in NXT? He's got a really weird, lame gimmick, but he has... I think he did MMA for a while. They keep saying that his striking coach is Bob Schreiber, and I'd be like, keep that on the down low. I wouldn't even bother listing that as an accomplishment, but he does a wheel kick. Like Shawn Michaels' Sweet Chin Music where he'd slap his leg, but he was just placing his foot up there next to their head. To do it on a wheel kick is very impressive and takes some serious control. They had him clearing the security team the other week, and he was just doing it over and over again and making it look perfect every time. So that's a real skill. In terms of crossovers, Minoru Suzuki is my man from the Pancrase lot. The rest of them, meh, couldn't care less. Kazushi Sakuraba, obviously, one of the main forces that got me into grappling to begin with. It's actually interesting, a lot of mat-based stuff is getting back into professional wrestling now. Originally, of course, the idea was that you had a wrestling match and you took it from town to town to show people, and then guys were like, I'm getting injured too much by actually wrestling this other wrestler every night. Why don't we just have a match that we show in each town? And of course, with all the egos and prima donnas, you had to be like, and you win tomorrow night, and I win the next night, and then you win tomorrow night, the night after, or whatever. Billy Robinson wrote a lot of interesting stuff about this, but in returning to sort of that classical style of wrestling, like Luthez stuff and ground-based stuff, Zack Sabre Jr. Does a lot of groundy stuff, and is British. and the thing about him is that even like top guys in New Japan will have this like ground style match with him because he's the only one you're going to get that kind of match out of. Why try and make Zack Sabre Jr. wrestle a different match when you can have him do that? And then you've got the guys going the other way with like Will Ospreay and Ricochet, who are just doing flippy shit all the time. Even within professional wrestling, there are so many different styles going on. Matt Riddle does a lot of wrestling stuff, and Kurt Angle towards the end of his career, when he went to ECW after the WWE bought it, they tried to sort of rebrand him as like a gnarly catch wrestler, and he did a lot more mat-based stuff in that. And then in TNA, he did more MMA, weird low-kicking fights with Samoa Joe. But yeah, he's quite interesting when they made him do mat work, because obviously he is an incredibly accomplished wrestler. Takayama deserves a special shout out for being both a legendary pro wrestler, in Japan at least. If you're not up on the Japanese wrestling game, I'm a little bit up on the Japanese wrestling game, and I don't fully appreciate how respected Takayama is over there. But he went into MMA and was awful, but had famously this incredible tolerance for being beaten. And he had that real, samurai spirit is a weird thing because a lot of it was just like World War II propaganda, basically, to get people to go and die. So it sort of like makes me go, ugh, when I hear people talking about it on MMA broadcasts and things. But, if you're going to say it about anyone, I suppose Takayama's the guy who embodies it, that samurai spirit. I think Sakuraga's got to be the most influential one, of course. Josh Barnett has done his fair share of pro wrestling and has been heavily influenced by catch wrestlers and people like that. My boy Jack Gallagher needs a shout out for having the most convincing headbutt in pro wrestling. It's so good. He does the head all the way back, head forward, and a big slap sound. And it really I don't know how he does it. He makes it sound like it's bone on bone. And he had a good few MMA fights before he was... I don't know if it was before he pro wrestled or like during his early pro wrestling career, but he has had some MMA success. Oh, actually, while we're on the subject, Jack Swagger, or Jake Hager, or whatever his name is, but he was Jack Swagger in the WWE. Huge lad, 6'8", I think, and a very accomplished amateur wrestler. They paired him with Dutch Mantel in like this weird racist gimmick, which sort of didn't go down too well. And then once they were criticised for it, they did a thing where they broke camera and spoke to whatever news pundit had criticised them, and it sort of just bummed everyone out. But yeah, he's going to Bellator, and he's actually got his... they just announced his first fight. It's been an age coming. I don't expect him to be like an actual force in the division, but it'd be interesting to see him in a cage fighting a guy who's resisting. Cheers, Daniel. Actually, while we're on it, one of the weird parts of pro wrestling is that the most convincing punch, or some of the most convincing punches you'll see in the WWE nowadays, are Ronda Rousey. Her weird shadowboxing actually works really well when there's someone on the other end going, "Oh no, she's hitting me." I agree with Al Snow. Al Snow said he was. There's some really interesting like lectures with Al Snow to like young wrestlers on YouTube. But one of the things he was saying there is like there's 7 things that you can. He was saying there are 7 things that people know how they feel when you do them in the ring, so you've got to be very careful when you do them. So things like hair pull, kick in the balls. Everyone knows what a kick in the balls feels like, except obviously people who aren't men. But he said the one that everyone knows and will also completely break immersion is the punch in the face, which is why the punch in firstly, if you're pretending it's real wrestling anyway. The punch in the face was illegal in catch wrestling matches. Gotch famously punched George Hackenschmidt in the nose midway through their 40-minute match. But everyone knows that a punch in the face is really quite nasty. And if you do it as every move, like The Rock, I suppose that's a different sort of wrestling. That's like a hyping people up. But if you do it every move, it just gets really lame. Like those weird Hulk Hogan in the corner on the turnbuckle punches. The less you punch in a pro wrestling match, the better the pro wrestling looks. That's what I love about Arn Anderson. I was watching an OSW episode, and he was taking on Johnny B. Bad. in WCW, and Johnny B. Bad's Mark Maron or whatever his name is started doing some shadow boxing, and Arn Anderson immediately calls the ref over and mimes he's doing a closed fist, and the referee warns him. They're like, oh yeah, all Mark Maron's moves are punching. That's supposed to be illegal in pro wrestling. But Arn Anderson is such a great old hand. I love anything like that, like Ric Flair when he's on his knees being chin locked or something like that, he'll pull the referee close by the collar and then punch the guy in the groin while the referee's looking at his face. Cool stuff like that. Like, pro wrestling should be great for the reasons that a good martial arts movie is great, where you're going, that's so cool. What cool things you've done with the stuff that we normally just do in front of another person. And, we know it's not real. We know it's not street effective or whatever, but you should be pushing the envelope with how many ways you can do this. And that's what's fun about, like, the Brock Lesnar AJ Styles match is a great example of when Brock Lesnar has his working boots on, he's really good. When he can't be asked, he's not good. But against AJ Styles, he really sold for AJ Styles, and they were doing loads of great little entries on, like, the calf slicer from the F5 attempt and things like that. And that the calf slicer is a grappling move. Nowadays, we mainly use it to enter, like, the truck, that sort of roll, or rather just take the back. But yeah, so there's some really cool entries on that AJ Styles does in various matches. Anyway, sorry, moving on. Cheers, Daniel. Hijack brackets, sorry I suck at the rhyming thing. I have a dilemma. I've just found out that my friend is a Zabit fanboy. What do I do? ? From a concerned fan. Conor brackets, again, not McGregor, sorry. The only correct answer is, if you have a friend who's a Zabit fanboy, ask them who's ducked him. They'll say Yair. Say who before that. They'll say everyone. You'll say name one, and they won't be able to. And then say, was he offered the Moicano fight? Did he turn down the short notice Moicano fight? Is he ducking Moicano? Bam! Checkmate. Right, I reckon that'll do us for this week. I'm your boy Jack Slack. We'll probably pop back. What is there going on this week? Hold on. Oh, Bellator Hawaii is going down. And Primus versus Chandler. So, okay, maybe we'll come back later in the week to check out that. And then there's UFC Milwaukee, which is Lee versus Iaquinta 2. Edson Barbosa versus... Oh, Dan Hooker. Okay, well, now. And Rob Font. Ah! Yeah, we're definitely going to be back later in the week. Right, I'm your boy Jack Slack. Sign up to the Patreon to support the podcast and keep me being able to do these, and sometimes 2 a week, and get history episodes and the upcoming Anderson Silva clips from the new version of Advanced Striking, whatever I call it. And, of course, the typing episode, which is 2.5 hours of my voice talking about Chinese history and weird Christian cults. Email the podcast at fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. Head to the Fight Primer to check out all the work I've done in the last week, including the pre-fight stuff and the post-fight stuff. And buy your Black Explosive t-shirt. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Blessed be the blessed.